Hey everybody, it's Phil Strazula from Select Software Reviews, and we're back with another conversation with an expert. Today, I'm joined by Stacie Justice, who is the head of People Ops at Isotope, and we're going to talk about agile methodology, something probably your engineering or product team uses, and specifically applying it to people operations. So Stacie, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Phil. Excited to chat today.
Yeah, and I want to get into this conversation about agile. Like I want to spend 95% of our time talking about that. But first things first, I heard a rumor that when you were growing up, you grew up in a different place than you live now, which is Boston, and you actually were pretty hands-on in raising some cows from like the get-go. Is that right? Is there any sort of truth to that? And is there any sort of relationship with what you do now in people ops?
That's good. Yes, so rumors are true. People think I'm this city girl. Now I've been in Boston for about 15 years. But I grew up on a farm in Kansas. My mom worked at a dairy farm and part of operations. And so often it was me coming along with her to check on, birthing calves out in the middle of the winter. And if they were abandoned or needed help or care, we'd bring them back, not only to the kind of headquarters, but sometimes to our home. And so I would often be the person staying up overnight, making sure the calf was bottle fed at the right times, maybe every 2 hours. And at times, sleeping in the barn with them to make sure that they had, the right vitals and everything they needed. So I think that translates a little bit in terms of just my care and love for other beings, my curiosity for how I can make a difference in the world and with my employees or my team members and my family. So I think that's how that translates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like it. It sort of it like encapsulates a little bit like who you are as a person, as I know you. And I think it's unsurprising that you got into a role that sort of is focused on helping people, helping organizations and your organization grow, but also helping individuals have a great time at work.
Yeah.
Um, do you mind giving us just a quick history on like your career and what you do right now and kind of your organization?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I got into HR in the hospitality industry. And so I had a conversation with someone, didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career. Someone said, "Hey, why don't you talk to our HR person? She's really great at helping people find out what their color their parachute or whatever the terminology was." And so I show up, this woman who's the head of HR at the Colonnade Hotel, Paula Rauenbuehler, just took 2 hours out of her day to listen to me. I think I was 22 or 23 at the time, talk about the things I liked, what I thought I was inherently good at or wanted to do. And at the end of that 2 hour session, she hired me. And that was my first kind of foray into HR. She taught me everything I know from the like foundational aspects. She came from the Ritz-Carlton world. So everything had to be like by the book and kind of like exceptional and delightful to our customers and to our employees. So she really kind of set a strong foundation for me. And since then, I've worked in the legal industry. I worked at a global not-for-profit called Oxfam after the Haiti earthquake, and then fell into kind of the tech world at Rocket Software, which was mainframe software, and actually doing some really cool stuff with it. And more recently, I was at Brightcove, a video software company, and now I'm at Isotope, which is audio software, an Emmy award-winning AI software company that's doing some pretty exciting things.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing for any audiophiles out there, music fans, definitely worth checking them out if you don't already know about the technology, which many people do in that community.
That's right.
Um, so I guess sort of the topic du jour, agile methodology in people operations. Do you mind just kind of for the uninitiated, like giving us the
Sure.
one-on-one on like what is agile methodology?
Yeah, so it was born out of engineering. I think in 2001, a bunch of engineers got together in some remote part of the country, went skiing, and came up with this agile manifesto. And that has really kind of created the foundation for the principles and mindset of agile that's been running through engineering and product teams for probably, I guess decades now. And so what it is a method that is challenging the more traditional linear waterfall development model where entire projects are pre-planned, fully built out, and then released into the wild without really being fully tested or, any feedback loops to say, is this the right thing to do? Sometimes those projects take years. Agile is trying to focus on more iterative, more value, more frequently over time, even in what is now like 2-week sprints is kind of a standard in some innovative engineering companies to deliver an update to your iPhone every 2 weeks. So you probably see this.
I think for me, like it's basically this transition from thinking about quarterly, annually, 5-year plans to what do we need to get done like right now, and how do we efficiently focus and get that stuff done in these 2-week sprints so that we can make progress, we can learn, we can iterate, we can fail as well. That's part of it. And I think it's become so important in the software engineering world where, software is deployed. I think Google makes changes to their algorithm 3 times a day.
That's yeah.
And that's Google, right? They're like this huge machine, but they figured out how to do this stuff. And I think what's kind of interesting is that a lot of the HR teams that I talk to are sort of stuck in this more, quarterly, annual sort of mindset of, here's what we want to do over the next 18 months. And that's fine to have these larger plans,
Yeah.
but I don't think there's many teams who are thinking in terms of sprints and making measurable progress and failing or succeeding and iterating. And so that's sort of cool. And I'm curious, like, as a people ops pro, like, how did you discover this and get into Agile?
Yeah, so I was a business partner for many years in the tech world and focusing on engineering teams. And so as a business partner, you're kind of exposed to a lot of data already. And to really make an impact in the engineering world, so that really swimming in this scientific approach and Agile is almost like water for them. And you come in and you say, I don't know, I really feel like maybe we should do something about morale. You'll get eaten alive by a room full of engineering leaders if you don't come in with a little bit more evidence base, some hypothesis you're trying to prove. And so a lot of it was just being around them, embedding myself in the way that they worked and trying to steal things here and there. Let's do a retrospective. What worked well this quarter? What went well? What didn't go well? And what are some things we can change? And just saying like, hey, let's do that in our HR team. This could be really useful for us. We've really been spinning our wheels. We're moving in 6 different directions. That was just like one easy way to pull in some data in real time and make some change. I think the other thing is experiments. Like it gives you this idea that like engineers fail all the time. You call it an experiment, it almost gives you permission to fail. And you mentioned that earlier. So it's kind of fun. So people they feel less shackled by this idea that everything has to be a perfect solution. Participation at the end of it needs to be 100%, and everyone needs to be satisfied at the end of it. When you're talking about long timeframes, it's really hard. A lot changes in 18 months. The thing that you thought was really good in that moment in time, by the time you deliver it in its entirety, may not have the right impact. So I think it just came out of knowing that my biggest critics were engineers and wanting to try to meet them where they were by using some of their own methods and then bringing those into HR.
Yeah, I love it. It's basically the power of diversity, right? It's like cross-functional thinking from people coming at problems from totally different perspectives. And you were able to learn from those teams that you were working with and actually apply it to super different problems, but that still had some of the same underlying kind of facets. To sort of like make it even more real, do you mind walking us through like a example of how you've used Agile in your people operations organization?
Yeah, exactly. So coming in at Isotope, we have the very traditional like annual performance review. And you're coming in, you're sitting with other executives and they're like, we really need to get rid of this thing. We need to do something bigger, better, more valuable. And you're like, okay, that's a huge project. And you start to think about, okay, well, if we're going to do this at scale for everybody, this is a huge project. What kind of systems are we going to need? And you start thinking like, what system do we need? What tool do we need that's going to manage this? Because you probably have a small HR team or people operations team. And you think about all the moves that need to be made, all of the inputs you need to take in. And it's a lot. And you get overwhelmed, I think, easily. And so we go through this process called feature mining, which is really to find the slice of that huge project. What is it that we could do right now that's going to have the biggest impact? And you walk through a kind of a nice method of what's the impact we want to have. We want our employees to feel that they have continuous feedback, that they have the feedback when they need it, that's going to help them grow and expand their capabilities and ultimately, be more valuable, to the company or in the market or what have you. And so then we do an exercise of, all right, well, why is this so big? And you kind of acknowledge the bigness of that goal. And there's so many different variables. And then you think about, well, what are the risks and the uncertainties in this? And you just kind of put it all out on the table. And then the last part of this exercise is the most powerful, which is what if we just ... And you say, all right, so now we know everything's on the table. We realize how big this is, how chaotic it could be with things, the world changes. And you say, well, what if we just did a manager, feedback template? And what if we just started with engineering? Or what if we just started with marketing? And we talk to all the managers in marketing. We show them a couple templates. We get feedback to say like, hey, which questions here in this feedback template or this 360 are going to have the most impact for you and your teams? And you take that feedback in, and then you build and demo and release something into marketing that is this ready to go, lightweight manager feedback form that they can use immediately. They use it. They say, oh, this was good. Thanks for including me in it. This is what I asked for. And then they say, but what could be better? We used it. This question seemed to really work for us. This one didn't. And then you iterate and you say, all right, now we've got an even better product. Let's see what happens if we release it at scale or in engineering or in customer care. Is it going to have the same impact? And you just keep delivering value in continuous modules like that. And at some point you may have, and this is the exciting thing, is that once you get something that starts really working, people start talking about it. And they're like, hey, I heard customer care really loves their annual performance reviews now. How do we get into that? We want something like that too. So instead of HR kind of always being like the nudge, like, hey, could you mind, like, please put your OKRs in the system. We really need more participation. We're not having the, impact we thought we'd have. And you kind of start being like, polling for people to participate rather than people coming to you. And so that's what's great about the experimentation, is it does give you this chance to be like just in time resource for people that you're not able to give. You're like, oh yeah, we're 18 months out from our implementation date. Stay tuned. In the meantime, use the old start, stop, continue, or the old rating system as an example.
Yeah, I love that as an example, because I think the immediate pushback probably from many HR leaders around Agile is going to be, well, we have these big projects, right? We're overhauling our compensation strategy. We're, whatever. And performance management is like a huge project. But the first thing you said there was like, well, then you slice it into like very manageable kind of chunks where you can launch, iterate, and just continue to improve and then eventually sort of roll something out. And you've done, all these different sprints that have gotten you like a much, much better product at the end of the day versus, okay, let's do an RFP. Let's look at all these different vendors and let's just like wholeheartedly like roll this thing out that we can't iterate on. And it has to be really good. And so we're really worried about it being good. So it gets delayed again and blah, blah, blah. And it's just sort of a disaster from a process perspective, like much more inefficient when you do it all in one chunk.
Right.
I think one of the sort of questions that comes to mind is, so like if I'm an engineer and I'm using Agile, I can like push some feature and maybe I push it to like a subset of our users. And if there's no engagement or it screws people up, I can look at the data and immediately understand if it's right or wrong and then like kill it. And I guess there's like a lower risk there in pushing this stuff out than I feel like in the world of HR, where there is more risk. Like if you push out like a something that like really rubs people the wrong way, like you're running a risk of hurting your own brain internally, of messing things up from people ops perspective. Is there a way that you hedge against that? Like, do you tell people this is an experiment, or like how do you think about the risk aspect of doing all these things every couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can gate it. I think maybe we're not thinking about 2 week sprints delivering every 2 weeks, but we might be like a hybrid. So I'm not saying everyone has to immediately run into these 2 week sprints. But definitely the language is powerful to say, hey, we're experimenting with this. Will you help co-create this solution with us? And people get excited. And like I said, they're kind of like, oh, so I can just throw anything at you? You're like, yeah, throw anything at us. And so what it does is people start to be really creative. And of course, HR knows that there's probably some things we're not going to be able to do for compliance reasons or whatever. And we're able to use our judgment there. But what it does is some of those crazy ideas become like a really reasonable, innovative idea when you're willing to just open your mind to the possibility of doing something new and different. And the biggest thing, you've mentioned it, is that you want people to want to participate in these programs. You want them to say, oh, there's value in this. That's why we're all here, is to make sure we're making that impact. And I think we all kind of feed off each other's energy. The more your employees are like, hey, this is actually a really cool one-on-one template. I can see this changing how I talk to my manager about my career and opportunities to expand my repertoire and whatever I'm trying to do. And then you're like, oh, great. And so it is, I think, not as scary as it sounds once you get started.
Yeah.
And the language of it is powerful. And I think the way HR has been operating and who we are as people and why we got into this field is exactly agile. Like, we have the data. That's why we build the relationships, not just to get invited to weddings and, make friends, but also to create those continuous feedback loops. But then we go and we don't have the framework to say to our chief people officer or their CEO to say, hey, let's try this thing. They kind of see it as this traditional, all right, that's a huge project. That's a huge investment. How do we know it's going to work? And you're like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't know how it's going to work. And I think this agile framework and methods and tools and concepts give you powerful language that works every day at companies like SpaceX and Spotify and Airbnb to release really cool, innovative products. You're kind of taking that same language, but applying it to HR programs and products that we're building for our employees that have a direct translation to our customers.
Mm.
And so that's the exciting part, I think, about Agile and being in this.
Yeah, and if I sort of compare and contrast like the way the world works versus the agile way, like it's like, all right, performance reviews, the way the world works today, like it's like, all right, let's overhaul this thing, and maybe it's a 12 to 18-month project, and we like roll it out 1 year, and like maybe it sucks, because like we didn't get all the feedback and the data, and we didn't yeah, we just didn't take the agile approach, honestly. And like we put the same amount of time and resources into it. And in 18 months, we have something that went from a B plus to a B minus versus doing the agile way, which like maybe along the way, like you go from a B plus to a B temporarily, but eventually you're going to get to that A because you're just learning so much over time and you're getting the rest of the organization involved. And I think my guess is they're probably like, wow, this is really cool. Like I get to have an impact. The people ops team really cares about this stuff. They're going about it in a really smart way. And it's just sort of like an awesome experience.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It gets me excited for sure. I remember, I think it was at Bright Cove where the head of UX, who is a part of engineering, was putting on a workshop about design thinking. And, she had this incredible role and this incredible impact to how every product was built at Bright Cove. And she was teaching everyone about the design thinking experience, which was empathize with your customer, get to know your customer, define the impact you're going to make, prototype it, test it, deploy it, and reiterate. And I was like, that's what we are trying to do in HR with our systems, but we didn't have this powerful language that goes along with it. And then when you start speaking like that, you're like, okay, we're design thinking. Everyone's like, oh, really? Tell us more. And it's really interesting how the ears perk up and it doesn't sound like maybe the more dusty traditional HR methods or approaches of the past. It's really pretty fun to be a part of.
Yeah. So true. It's so powerful. So I guess like if somebody's listening to this and their ears are perking up a bit, they're, head of HR, they're, whatever their sort of title is, where do you recommend they start to learn about this stuff so that they can actually be good enough to implement it at their organization? Like, how do you get started?
Yeah, so there is a resource that I've gone to that really is one of a kind and maybe one of the first, trying to translate Agile from IT and Agile from SaaS and software into something that actually works for HR. It's this woman, Rena Hellstrom. She's got this group called the Agile HR Community, and they're getting bigger and bigger all the time. There's HR leaders from all around the world. They have a certification process that you can go through. It's a really great virtual learning course, and she's really sophisticated models no matter where you are as a company, no matter how big you are. She's worked with some of the biggest companies in the world and also can translate that to a one-person HR team. And how do you do it and start in small way? It's kind of the point of Agile. What's that little slice? What's that little experiment we can start with and build on? And I think you can do that at any size and at any scale. And then there's also Josh Burson, I think a lot of people are familiar with, is really starting to get on the Agile HR train, and he's got a ton of great content in his learning platform. And then of course, like LinkedIn content that he puts out. And I think a lot of podcasts, if you just do a search, are starting to pick up on what does Agile HR mean, translating that into real terms for people ops. Yeah, there's another woman, Rachel Ben Hamo on LinkedIn, who's doing some really cool stuff with Agile HR and great visuals, and kind of understands the importance of the language, taking what HR is already doing, but actually putting it into a framework that really gives it legs and power and a runway to do more interesting, innovative things.
Yeah, I like that. It's sort of it's a better way to do stuff, but it's also a better way to name the stuff that you're maybe already doing and get some more internal clout. Do you think there's any value as well in just sort of hanging out with like the UX product manager, engineer teams and trying to figure out how they're using it and just learn about Agile that way?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's before, when I thought, oh, I really caught on to something, I didn't know what it was. I thought I was just in the flow of an HR person. It was because I had embedded myself in engineering, product management, design thinking world, and taking a lot of how do they solve complex problems? How do they deliver faster and in ways that have more value than other teams and departments do it? And once you see it, and once you see how they work, it's pretty easy to translate it into your everyday life or kind of your goals and strategy for people ops. So
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, oftentimes HR and engineering don't always mix well together because they assume we're all intuitive, going by our gut, or maybe this other unfair bias towards HR. And then HR sometimes avoids engineering because they're maybe overly cynical, or they're the first ones to resist a rollout. And so go find your detractors and say like, hey, well, what would work? Let me throw some stuff with you and make them your best friend in terms of any sort of implementation. And I talked about like getting more cross-functional in how you make decisions in HR. I always go to engineering first. So yeah.
Yeah, I like it. It's the power of diversity, right? Like the power of different
Exactly.
perspectives. Um, Stacie, thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's such an interesting concept. Honestly, you were the person that introduced this to me. And immediately when you started talking about it, I obviously heard your enthusiasm, but it just like really made sense to me. And I think it's going to be a huge part of the next decade in people ops, HR. So thank you so much for sharing your story and giving your insights to everybody out there who's interested in this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Anyone can reach out to me as well on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect if they're interested to learn more. And thanks for having me, Phil.